Renate Krakauer was born in March 1941. On September 11th of that same year, Stanislaw, the city of her birth, was invaded by the Nazis. Although she cannot remember the earlier years of her life, she knows of some events from what she was told. On October 11th, 1941, while Renate was just 7 months old, the first large action took place in Stanislaw. An action is a brutal roundup of Jews for forced labor, deportation, or killing. Over 12,000 Jews were killed by the Nazis and their Ukrainian allies in this particular action. Since Renate lived in a relatively non-Jewish part of the town, the anticipated knock at the door never came, and she and her parents were spared. By December, however, Renate and her family were forced to live with other Jews in a ghetto surrounded by a 2-meter fence. Life in the ghetto was no place for a baby to grow up, and Renate's parents were forced to work in labor battalions. On March 31st, 1942, another action occurred. Nazis broke into Renate's house where she was sleeping in her crib. One Nazi was about to shoot Renate, who was still a baby, when he was ordered not to. The only reason that Renate survived was that she was mistaken for the child of her father's cousin, who happened to be an architect valuable to the Nazis. Death was common in the ghetto due to actions, disease, and starvation. Sometimes, Jews were even forced by Nazis to dig their own graves at a cemetery before being shot. In December of 1942, Renate's mother, Charlotte, decided to try and escape the ghetto. She bundled up Renate and went to the gate. Luckily, her cousin, who gave loyal service to the Nazis, was in charge. He turned his back and let Charlotte escape with Renate. Charlotte was able to give Renate to a Catholic family in Poznikito to be looked after. In that town, she came to treat Marinia as her mother and fit in as a sister to Marinia's 2 sons. There, she was able to have a relatively normal life, although far from perfect. She lived there until she was 3 and a half when the Red Army managed to break German lines on July 27, 1944. She was reunited with her parents, who had actually been living in the same town. The family lived in Stanislaw until 1945, when the war officially ended. They left the city because there was still much discrimination and distrust, as well as the fact that they were being pressured to become Soviet citizens. They left to Berzeg, where her father opened a store. In this new city, landmines were a large threat. One was found in the attic of their house, and Renate's father, William, was forced to stand by as his Soviet technician disarmed it. The theory was that if it blew up, both the technician and her father would die. This was seen as equality. Renate had a brush with landmines as well. One day when she was alone, she followed a cow herder to the fields and fell asleep by a tree. The cow stepped on mines, and the explosions could be heard back in the town. Her parents did not know where she was and feared for her life. When she was finally found, her father gave her the spanking of her life. Her father was later arrested for his involvement in the black market, but managed to escape by bribing a guard. Family then left to find living in a displaced persons camp. Here, Renate made friends with a girl who had been thrown out of a train that was going to a death camp by her parents. Her father managed to establish a school at the camp, but 2 years later, they left for their next destination, Canada. They lived in Montreal in an apartment, and Renate attended Guy Drummond School. Renate was well behaved and achieved good grades, but the owner of the apartment threatened to throw them out if Renate made any noise. When this owner complained after Renate played dominoes with a friend, her parents decided to find yet another new place to live. They settled with another immigrant family in a house in downtown Montreal. Although they only had 2 rooms in this new house, the immigrants were much kinder than the apartment owner. After living in Montreal for 7 years, they left to Brantford, Ontario, then settled in Hamilton. Renate left for the University of Toronto in 1959 and still lives in Toronto to this day. And so this concludes the story of Renate Krakauer, the miracle child.